On today's Locked On Jayhawks Football Friday, Jalon Daniels back in spring practice, some injuries. We're going to be catching you up on spring football for KU.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. Hit me up with any questions or anything you want to talk about on the show. We're doing our first Football Friday. Spring football is back in session for KU football, and it has been for a little bit here with the Spring Showcase coming up soon. So we're going to start doing, now that we're in off-season mode, Football Friday editions of the shows here with Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be talking about the biggest storylines right now in spring football. Jalon Daniels returning to action, injuries, including a key one at left tackle, and also some offseason catch-up if you missed some of what happened with the transfer portal in the offseason, and possible positions to target for KU once spring football comes to a close and the transfer portal opens back up. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So let's start with the latest spring football storylines, the top storylines for KU football. Well, Jalon Daniels, he is a pretty prominent figure for KU football. So let's talk about him first. Jalon Daniels is back. He has been practicing for KU. Now, it seemed like at first during spring practices that Jalon was more of a kind of limited participant, maybe out there in pads, maybe would participate in some of the drills, but not all of the drills. Well, you look at some of the latest, highlights and things that are being talked about. It seems like he's starting to get more and more reps. I don't know that I would classify him as being like a full participant. I don't know. Maybe he is, but certainly it doesn't seem that way. But at the very least, he is back. He is in pads. He is there. He is a real person. He is good enough to at least be able to throw and everything. But this is going to be something where, yes, that is a good sign. Yes, that is a good thing that he is out there and he is at least ramping things back up and he is at least participating to some level, some extent. But you're going to be holding your breath the whole way through. Like, even if he makes it out of spring football okay, you're still going to be holding your breath in the fall. You're still going to be holding your breath once you get to camp and even every day through the season. Because what we learned about, the injury here, and I don't know if, because it has been different injuries that have kind of kept him out over the different seasons so far for KU, right? You have the shoulder injury in 2022. You have the back injury last year. But what we saw last year with back injuries, it could literally flare up at any moment in time. So, I know this is not like an assuring thing, but theoretically, you could be 100% healthy through the first 2 weeks of the season. Who's to say that at any moment on a Wednesday practice, it gets retweaked? And that is an unfortunate way to live through a season, that you constantly have that fear in the back of your head of, is something going to happen again? But you just hope it works out, that everything lines up for Jalon Daniels in a season. It's not his fault that, he's not choosing to be injured. You know what I mean? Some guys, that's just kind of an unfortunate thing they have to confront and kind of have to deal with. And so for Jalon, you just hope he can stay healthy all the way through, not just because you don't have Jason Bean anymore, who is this, electric backup quarterback that's still able to carry you to a 9-win season, but that with Jalon, if you just want to see what it looks like for full season. He is such an electric player. He's such a dynamite player. He's such a dynamite character and a leader in this offense that, you really just want to, beyond for him and his personal sake and getting to possibly go off to the NFL after this season, if he does stay healthy and has that big season, you want to see the test subject of what does it look like if we get a full season of Jalon Daniels, how good he has looked each season he's played in more limited sample sizes. What if you do get a full season? Are we talking, possibly winning a Big 12 championship? Are we talking about possible college football playoff contention for Kansas and Jalon Daniels and everything? That would be so cool to see. So you really hope everything happens. And I think furthermore, what's going to happen with the backup quarterback position becomes very interesting in spring. It's not just about who wins the battle between Cole Ballard and Isaiah Marshall, but it's also about, do you feel confident enough saying that whoever does win that backup battle is good enough that if Jalon does have an injury and has to miss time during the season, that they can not just be, ho-hum and fill in, but that they can win you games similar to how Jason Bean did last year. And if the answer is no, then maybe they go into the portal in the offseason. If the answer is yes, then you feel good about where you're at. Now, the other big, I think, storylines right now with spring football have to be kind of injury related, whether it is like Jalon Daniels or other guys who maybe are more limited in some of the spring ball, or maybe just aren't participating in spring ball, but are kind of expected to be back in the fall. And we saw that a guy like I know Kenny Logan has missed a spring in the past, and Mike Nowitzki missed a spring, last year for KU. Obviously, both those guys have departed from now. But injuries are not new, and obviously in spring you want to take everything very lightly with those guys that is the case. But it seems like Calvin Clemens suffered a really bad possible ankle injury for KU, and that's obviously very unfortunate. He started the bowl game for KU at the tackle position, and as just a redshirt freshman this year, since he still preserved his redshirt last year, was going to be in a tight competition. And it seemed like some people were picking him to be the favorite in that competition over Logan Brown. Logan Brown coming off an injury from last year, but obviously has all the talent in the world. Now, it seems like Logan Brown has done very well in spring practice so far that who knows, maybe if Calvin Clemens was healthy all the way through, that Logan Brown wins the job anyway. Now, I don't know the situation with Calvin Clemens. Is this just an injury that's going to keep him from the rest of spring ball? Is it an injury that's going to keep him from fall camp and start of the season or any part of the season? I don't know. But certainly this makes you think that Logan Brown is going to further have that edge up on the tackle position. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. He, again, is a very talented player. And if he can live up to that potential this year, Kansas, I mean, it's hard to say you're going to get better at the left tackle position because Dominic Pooney was so good. And he's going to probably be like a day 2 pick in the NFL draft. So it's hard to say that. But I mean, Logan Brown has like all Big 12 level potential in him, right? If you can kind of unlock that this season. To a lesser extent, some other injuries like LJ Arnold, that's kind of a big one. Sounds like he's going to be out for spring football. It's less concerning though with the Arnold one as maybe, some of the other ones for KU because, Arnold is a proven commodity. Like, what you're going to get there. Whereas with the Clemens one and kind of the tackle one in general, you're kind of talking about a position where you have competition going on and you're trying to figure out kind of what's going on. Another bit of news is that Matt Lubick, who was an analyst for KU, is the Nevada new offensive coordinator. And so, you're going to lose coaches to other jobs. We talked about this before, and Kansas has so far this offseason, and especially you're going to lose analysts to be, coordinators elsewhere. But this is about as big of a loss as any. It feels like, unfortunately, we've said that a lot this offseason for KU. First it was Andy Kotelnicki. Then you're talking about with Jordan Peterson, right? You're talking about with Scott Fuchs, the offensive line coach. Like, you have lost not just a lot to the coaching staff this year and a lot more than you have in the previous years, but you have lost a lot of really good coaching talent this year. And Matt Lubick, he's dealing with some health stuff, some cancer stuff. And so it sounds like he's getting over that. So, prayers up for him and his family. And obviously you hope that he's moving past that and everything and in the stage of, recovery and heading in the right direction. If he was not dealing with some of that stuff, he might have been the offensive coordinator hire for KU before they hired Jeff Grimes, because he had a heavy hand in what KU's offense looked like, did Matt Lubick. Andy Kotelnicki is not the Penn State offensive coordinator right now without Matt Lubick. So that is a big loss from the analyst perspective. Now, KU does have a couple other coaching additions that they made from like the analyst perspective. I think they got a coach from Baylor, and it sounds like, they're bringing in some good other sharp minds, but that one is a tough one to lose with Lubick going there. But maybe somebody to keep an eye on that, let's say Jeff Grimes leaves for a head coaching position or another position in a year or two. Maybe Matt Lubick becomes the next guy that you bring in for KU if things kind of line up a little bit more there. And then the last big storyline I have here is that in college football this year, they're adding the headset communication. So therefore you have to have guys, obviously it's going to be the quarterback on the offensive side, but you have to have somebody on the defense who I think in the NFL, they call it the green dot guy. They have the green dot on their helmet to signify that they're going to be the ones with the communication, the radio communication in their headset. And so, like, for the Chiefs, it's like Nick Bolton. It usually is a linebacker. I don't know if any teams use like a safety, but the linebacker is kind of the quarterback of the defense in most times. Cornell Wheeler is that guy for KU. And I think that becomes very interesting when you look at the linebacker position. Obviously, Rich Miller graduates, Craig Young graduates, and you have Tywan Berryhill back in the fold. You have J.B. Brown back in the fold, Cornell Wheeler back in the fold. Guys like Logan Brantley looking to make a step up. And this is a position for KU that I wouldn't quite quantify as a strength compared to other Big 12 teams from what it's been so far every year of the Lance Leipold era, but it also felt like it's gotten like gradually a little bit better each and every year, even if it hasn't again been, a top 5 unit or anything in the Big 12. And this year, once again, it's a question. But I actually think there's a higher ceiling of this linebacker unit than any of the years in the past. And part of the reason why is Cornell Wheeler. I think J.B. Brown is going to be a stud in year 2. I really liked what you saw in year 1. I think with a bigger role in year 2, it's only going to get better. I think Logan Brantley maybe is going to be ready to make a bigger impact this year. Jason Gilliam can kind of rotate in at like the Hawk position and give you a little bit of reps there. Now it's still a position that maybe you're looking for to add more in the transfer portal, but like to me, the ceiling of Cornell Wheeler and JB Brown and Logan Brantley, I don't know, like Craig Young had a high ceiling too, but like is maybe higher than the linebacking court. Now, are you going to reach that ceiling? That kind of becomes a question here. But the point being, the fact that Cornell Wheeler is the guy they give the helmet communication to kind of signifies that, yeah, you're looked at as being a starter. You're looked at as being a leader of the defense. He's a former Michigan transfer, so you're living up to that 4-star kind of potential. And if they're basically saying he's good enough to be that guy, I think that is a great sign for the step he's taking forward as you look at that position to be better this year than maybe it was last year. There's been one of those positions each and every year. 2 years ago, it was like, oh man, I don't know. What do they, you lose Kwame Lassiter. What do they have really back at the receiver position? Turns out the receiver position was a strength. Last year, it was like, oh man, you lost a lot on the defensive line, or, how good is this defensive line going to be? Well, it turns out you had Austin Booker and, Devin Phillips and some of these guys that Gage Keys that made a big impact on the defensive line. It was better than you might have thought on paper. I'm kind of circling the linebacker core to be that position this year for KU. Let's get on to offseason catch-up. If you missed any of it, or maybe a reminder about what Kansas added and lost during the offseason and in the transfer portal, and then maybe what are some positions that they could target once we get through spring ball. Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to your IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risks, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Offseason catch-up for KU football on our first football Friday of the calendar year here. Let's start with what they lost. So if you remember, they lost a couple guys on the offensive line. Spencer Lavelle, who transferred to Nevada. He'll be there with Matt Lubick, I guess. More of a rotational backup offensive lineman who didn't see a ton of playing time. Armaj Reed-Adams, he did see a ton of playing time. You kind of had 6 offensive linemen, 6 starting level offensive linemen for 5 spots that rotated around. Reed-Adams played some guard, he played some tackle, was really solid for KU. He was a very solid starter, and with his size and potential, the thought is he could take an even another step this next year, but he's going to be trying to do that at Texas A&M. Then you have Gage Keys, who you lost at the defensive tackle spot, that was a big loss because you were already losing guys to graduation, and notably like Devin Phillips, and Gage Keys probably would have been a starter this year for KU. Gets a big sum of NIL money from Auburn, goes off to the SEC, and then you lose some other players who maybe weren't playing as much. Tanaka Scott, Will Huggins, and Reese Thomas. Thomas was like a walk-on. He's going to Lindenwood, so he'll play KU. Will Huggins goes to Pittsburgh State, which I think he's going to dominate there. And Tanaka Scott goes to North Alabama, which is the FCS side of things. But overall, I mean, yes, there are some key players lost there at key positions and everything, but like considering how much some teams get poached from the transfer portal, that really is not as bad as it maybe could have been, I guess would be the way of putting it. KU has put a lot of resources to retaining guys. Now, you could have more players leave, and in fact, you probably will at the end of spring ball. The key is going to be, can you retain the key ones on the 2 deep, right? Like it's one thing when you're losing Will Huggins, as much as I like his potential and everything, and Reese Thomas and stuff. It's another thing if you end up losing, starting level players. In terms of what you gained, though, in the offseason, on the offensive side of the ball, Deshaun Hanukkah, tight end from Iowa State, seems like he has been impressive so far in spring ball, and he maybe will be tight end number 1. Shane Baumgardner, who was the Division II transfer at the center position, was like the best center in Division II. Sounds like he is not the biggest guy in the world, but at center specifically, that's the position I care least about how big you are. It's more so just how effective you are. Like I remember that the Coastal Carolina teams that were really good, the 2 years that they happened to play Kansas, and 1 year they were ranked, and the other year, I don't know, they might have been ranked the other year for a good amount of time. But either way, like double-digit wins both seasons, and Grayson McCall was great. I think they were like the Mighty Munchkins or something like that. They had a nickname for the offensive line. And like, I remember their center was like, it was like 5'8", like, I don't know, like 250 pounds or something like that, but they were good. And I think at that position specifically, it's almost more mental, and like centers are mostly, they're doubling on a defensive tackle with a guard, or they're working up to the second level on a linebacker. So I'm a little less concerned with the size. As long as he just knows what he's doing, he's a smart guy and snaps the ball well. Like I think you can get away with that more than maybe some of the other offensive line positions. But it does sound like he's actually doing well in spring ball, and that's going to be important, because if he doesn't do well, then maybe you're having to play Michael Ford at the center position, which maybe that's a little more out of his comfort zone. Michael Ford is a great guard. Would he be a great center? I don't know. That remains to be seen. And then if you can stick Shane Baumgardner at center and Michael Ford can just be a great guard, it opens the other positions up a little bit more and helps your depth a little bit more. You added Daryl Simmons too to the guard position, longtime starter for Iowa State. So that gives you, whether it's being that kind of starter at the other guard spot next to Michael Ford, or being that first guard off the bench, you can kind of play the Armaj Reed Adams role from last year. Like that is a very nice addition for KU. Defensive side of the ball, you added Javier Derritt from North Dakota State, and he comes in at the defensive tackle spot. I think just an adult you added to the room that's always good at the defense tackle and on the line. Dylan Wuedke is the transfer from Youngstown State. He's going to have a big role this year. And, maybe initially the thought was we're going to rotate him and Jeremy Robinson. But now that you lost Austin Booker and maybe you don't have that obvious candidate to be the rush end, now maybe, a guy like Dylan Brooks, who was the former 4-star transfer from Auburn, maybe a guy like, I don't know, somebody further down the depth chart, like Dean Miller or something like that from last year emerges this year and can be that guy. But maybe we see some Wuedke there too. He was a big addition for KU, and honestly, they could probably use more there at the defensive end spot. Devin Dye on the safety position. Sounds like KU is going to play a lot of 3 safety looks. I think it'll be a little bit less of, hey, we have this unicorn in Craig Young, who is a linebacker, but basically is also kind of like a safety. And so we can basically play with 3 linebackers on the field. I think now instead of that, you're going to see more 2 linebacker looks, and it'll be more 3 safety looks for KU. And that's been a popular thing in the Big 12. That's what like Iowa State does, and they always have these great defenses. KU has a lot of talent in the safety room with Marvin Grant and OJ Burrows back, and Jalon Dye coming back as depth. And you have some guys who were kind of coming up as young players, whether it's like Mason Ellis or something, who logged like the fastest time in the offseason on one sprint. Guys that Taylor Davis, right? That you're going to have a lot of talent in the safety room. Devin Dye adds to that, and it only adds to the idea of playing those 3 safeties. And then you had a bunch of freshmen, handful joining at semester. Obviously, you'll have more joining in fall, but Jalen Todd, Dak Brinkley, Isaiah Marshall, Red Martell, and Damani Maxon ended up joining at semester. I don't know if maybe Harry Stewart ended up joining too, but anyway, that gives those guys maybe a leg up, and maybe gives a chance for Isaiah Marshall to be the backup quarterback, and maybe for Damani Maxon to get on the field earlier. Jalen Todd, right, as you're kind of building the depth in those DB rooms, or Dak Brinkley, if you are looking for more defensive end, could a guy like Dak Brinkley get on the field right away, right? I think these kind of become some of the questions for KU. But what could they add in the transfer portal once spring ball comes to a close? We'll discuss that in a moment on Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite sporting event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets to your favorite sports, music, comedy, theater event near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guaranteed, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to be having. Flash deals and last-minute tickets, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Images of the seat views. They even have lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection. And how about the Game Time guarantee? Means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off for first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So what could Kansas still use in the transfer portal? Well, it'll be interesting to see what they lose, who departs at the end of spring ball. Now, if you remember, Kansas lost some of their assistant coaches like Jordan Peterson and Scott Fuchs. That was after spring ball or the second semester, whatever you want to say, had already started for KU, or I guess after the transfer portal closed, I think is the better way of me putting this. So theoretically, would any players have, if those guys left before the portal closed, would any players have left with them, if the portal was still open, and therefore they're going to have that decision to make at the end of spring? Good news is for Kansas, you had all this time over the couple months in spring ball and getting to know the new coaches to try to stick around, right? And to convince them to stay and everything. So that'll be interesting. And then it kind of becomes a little bit of, if you lose anything, you try to add that same position kind of in the portal for KU. But I think beyond that, obviously it never hurts to add more players on the line, whether it's offensive or defensive line. That's always position you're looking for more depth. But specifically for this team, you're looking to add more defensive line depth. I don't think another interior defensive lineman would be crazy. I know Tommy Dunn and DJ Withers, you went from being not playing much to then hearing good things to then you become kind of role players / starters last year. Can you take another step up this year? And if you can, that'd be great. You had Javier Derritt. But again, KU will rotate 4 or 5, even 6 guys if they got it at the defensive tackle spot. Defensive end clearly would be one, specifically if you can get a pass rush type, because that's what you had with Kyron Johnson, Delani Phelps to Austin Booker. It wasn't just a defensive end, it was your pass rushing defensive end. Whereas at the strong defensive end spot, which is kind of Jeremy Robinson, more of a Dylan Wuedke, you maybe feel a little bit better there. So that would be what you're looking for. Maybe you add a starting level linebacker. They've kind of done that the last 2 off seasons. JB Brown, I think he was an addition though before spring ball started. You did do that with Lorenzo McCaskill the year before. That would be one that kind of makes sense, whether it is somebody who can at the very least be on the 2 deep and be extra depth, or if it is someone who can be that starter level player. And then the last thing you're looking for is just health, kind of going through the offseason for KU with some of the injuries and, bang-ups that you're kind of dealing with. But that'll do it for our Football Friday edition of Locked On Jayhawks. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. Back with more KU basketball content. If there's any breaking news, we'll have plenty more KU football content as well. This has been LOJ.